Hello, my name is Tatiana. I am not a sourdough expert. I am a stay-at-home mom. I work part-time from home as well. I have a very busy life with my 3 boys. I homeschool, and sourdough has become a very fun hobby for me. I've been baking for the last 3 years. I've decided to distill all the information that I've gathered, every bit of knowledge that I have accrued into one video to hopefully help my friends and family who have been asking for advice or asking for videos showing how I make sourdough. I am going to be showing you everything I do from start to finish. This will not be a short video. I'm going to be going in depth in real time. So something that I really wanted when I was first starting out was a video to literally walk me through the entire process. I knew it would have been nice for me to see somebody do that whole process all the way through. So I'm going to be starting talking about the different supplies you're going to need. Some of these are not a necessity, but they're all very nice to have if you're going to be making sourdough frequently, which I bake twice a week, so it makes sense for me to have these supplies. The first thing, non-negotiable, you're going to need is a giant bowl. Big mixing bowl. Heavy glass works the best, or ceramic. Something that when you're folding and kneading the dough, it's not going to be lifting up off of the counter. A dough whisk, or your hands, you could use your hands. A food scale. Bannetons, these are not needed either, but these are really nice to have. I do recommend getting these. They usually come in a kit you can buy on Amazon with a bench scraper, a bread loam, and the whisk. They're usually together. You can usually buy that in a kit, so I do recommend having those. I also use just reusable bowl covers. You could just use like a shower cap or anything you'd like to keep it from drying out in the fridge overnight. And then lastly, I do use this container for proofing. I find it really hard to gauge when the dough is done rising because it's not straight up and down. I do recommend having a container with straight sides to better gauge the rise. I also use a big wide mouth jar for my starter. I do recommend having one of these. And you'll hear interjections from my 3-year-old throughout the video, I'm sure. He's the only one awake right now.
I don't love that.
You don't love that? It's okay. You don't have to. You'll need some parchment paper and some oven mitts. I really love these. I burned myself so many times in the oven. These have been huge lifesavers for me. And then lastly, you'll need a couple of Dutch ovens or any pot that has a lid. Pardon my dirty oven. It doesn't get cleaned nearly as often as it should. And on to the actual ingredients you'll need to make your bread. Obviously, bubbly sourdough starter. I'll show you how I feed my starter in just a minute. All-purpose flour or bread flour. And if you're using all-purpose, I do like to add Vital Wheat gluten. I replace 2% of the flour in my recipe with Vital Wheat gluten. And this just makes like a DIY bread flour. And then salt, I use Redmond's real salt. That's my favorite. Lastly, I do use white rice flour to coat my Banneton baskets. This keeps it from sticking. White rice flour doesn't activate the gluten and it won't make it stick to the liner. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. Bread making or sourdough bread making is a 3-day process. Day 1 is going to be when you're going to feed your sourdough starter. You're going to need your scale. Go ahead and zero it out. The ratio changes on the seasons. Right now I'm feeding a little bit higher starter to the flour and water. Generally in the summer I will do a lot less because it's a lot warmer in the house and it rises a lot faster. So this is all approximate. This is not exactly how I do it every single time, but this is generally the ratio I use. So this is about 40 grams of starter, and then I'm going to add about 3 times the amount of water, and then a little over 3 times the amount of flour. 40 grams, so we're going to be adding about 120 of water. A little bit too much. We're going to take a little off. 120, perfect. Tare it again. All-purpose flour, I'm going to add closer to 135, 140-ish. Really, you just want to feed it enough so that whatever recipe or whatever ratio you're using for your sourdough, you're going to have enough starter to make the bread the next day. My recipe calls for 200 grams of active starter. So I'm making sure that I have enough starter to make my bread with and a little bit left over to keep for the next time I want to bake. A lot of people will say you can't use metal in your sourdough because it'll mess with the, I don't even know, the bacteria. I have never found that to be the case. I use stainless steel in mine all the time. I like mine to be thick. Some people will say pancake batter consistency. I like to do a little bit thicker. Again, this is just what works for me. This is what I've found success with. With sourdough starter, you don't want to tightly cover it. As it expands and releases CO2, it will burst if it's not loosely covered. So this jar is really nice. It just kind of loosely covers the top. And then I will mark it with a dry erase marker to show it where the level was. And then this will live on my counter overnight, and I will make dough with it the following day. You fed your sourdough starter, it's going to live on the counter. What do you do with the discard? I don't ever throw it away. I keep it and use it for recipes like pancakes. I throw it in all sorts of things, hamburger buns. You can really add it into any other baked recipe you're working with, and just reduce the flour and water by a little bit, or the flour and liquid, and it gives it a great flavor. And you have not lived till you've had sourdough discard pancakes. They're amazing. So I have obviously a lot of these jars and a lot of starter lying around, and so I will just combine all of my discard, the extra starter, the unfed or inactive starter, into one jar, and then this lives in my fridge. And I will pull this whenever I want to make bread. I'll take out however much I want, 40 grams, feed it and make it in a new jar, and that will be the starter I would use for my bread, and then the cycle repeats from there. To begin mixing up the dough, we're going to add 200 grams of that active bubbly starter to our glass bowl. Yeah, honey. All right, then we're going to zero out this scale again and add 750 grams of lukewarm filtered water. And the key with sourdough starter is you want to add it after it has more than doubled. It needs to be nice and bubbly. It needs to go a little bit past that doubling point to where the yeast really starts to get hungry, so that's ready to be made into bread. I'll whisk it up with the dough whisk until it's nice and frothy. And it should look like that. Lots milky, no chunks, nice and bubbly. Zero it out. Now my recipe calls for 1,000 grams of flour, and what I like to do is add 980 grams of this organic unbleached all-purpose flour, and then I add 20 grams of vital wheat gluten, and like I said, that just makes it to a DIY bread flour. It raises the protein content, and I found this works really well for me with this level of hydration in the dough. If you just want to use an all-purpose flour, you absolutely can. You might try a lower hydration recipe, closer to 68%, and I can put another lower hydration ratio in the description of the video. 980 grams of flour, give or take 20 grams of vital wheat gluten. I do something that is called a fermentolise. It's not quite an autolyse, which is an autolyse just means you pre-mix your water and your flour and let that sit before you add any other ingredients of your recipe. I do something called a fermentolise. I add the starter in. I've just found this has been the easiest way for me to get it a jump on fermentation. So I just add these three ingredients: the starter, the water, the flour, and this is going to get a nice mix, and it is going to sit for about 40 minutes before I mix in a little bit more water and then the salt. Really, you want to mix until you get a nice shaggy dough. Everything's incorporated, there's no spots of dry flour left. And I'm going to cover this and let it sit somewhere warm. Sometimes I'll stick it in the microwave with the light on for the next 40 minutes. Okay, 40 minutes, give or take, has gone by. Our fermentales is done, and we're ready to add a little bit of water and our salt and do our first official mix. So I take the dough, and I don't measure the amount of water. I just kind of do a splash, just enough to get it wet so that I can handle it without getting too sticky. And then we're going to need to measure our salt. So I get it on the scale and tare it. And then for this 2 loaves, I add about 20 grams of salt. And this is the fun part. I start by like just dimpling it in. And at this stage, you can't really be too rough with the dough. This is like the very beginning of building structure. So after I dimple it in, I start with my first round of stretch and folds. So I come out to the outside, I grab a handful, pull up and to the middle. And I go all the way around and I do that, pulling it in as I go. The key with this is to keep your hands wet and then they won't stick. That's why adding that bit of water really helps handle the dough really easily. You'll notice that it'll start to get a lot tougher, or it'll start to resist the handling a little bit. So once I go all the way around and kind of get it into like a dough ball, I'll then do a little bit of kneading like this. I want it to come together without starting to tear it. So once it starts to resist me a little bit more, like about like that, I will turn it over and I will cover it again. And then we're gonna wait 30 minutes and then we'll come back and do our first set of coil folds. At this point, you can put your covered bowl into the oven with the light on or the microwave with the door jar with the light on, just to keep it in a warm spot. That'll help give it a jump on the rise. All right, 30 minutes have gone by. With wet hands, we're gonna do our first set of coil folds. So I grab underneath here and pull, and it should come away from the bowl. Once it comes away, I'm gonna fold it in over itself. I'm gonna turn it around and do the same thing on the other side. Turn it other way. And fold it over on itself. Do it one more time. And once more for the measure. Tuck it in. And resting again in the microwave with the light on for 30 minutes. It's been another 30 minutes, second set of coil folds. Same process. Grab each side, pull up, and fold it in on over itself. And you'll notice the texture of the dough start to change, become even smoother. And as we build up the gluten, it'll become even more so. You'll notice you may need to do less and less handling each time to get it to tuck into a nice little ball. So now I'm just gonna tuck it a little bit. And we'll do one more set of coil folds after a 30-minute rest. We're gonna do the last stretch and fold, and we're gonna prep our container to do our bulk ferment. You do not have to do this. When you pour it out from the glass bowl, it comes out really nicely. Plastic, usually not so much. So I just take a spray of avocado oil and it helps it come out a lot easier at the end. So that's all prepped to go. And with wet hands, we'll come in and we'll do our last stretch and fold. The dough should be very smooth and fluffy at this point. Still got quite a bit of rising to go, but it's definitely airier than when we started. We'll transfer it over into our oiled container. Now, depending on your container, you may want to mark this with a dry erase marker, and then we're going to wait for it to about double. We can stick this in the microwave with the light on, or it just depends on how warm your house is. If it's a warmer day, you can just keep it out on the counter, and it's going to take anywhere from the next 5 to 8, 9 hours to get to doubling, and then once it doubles, we will shape it. Here's a little update. A couple hours later, it's rising nicely. Several hours later, our dough has basically doubled. It's looking good, nice and shiny. We're gonna go ahead and dump this out and shape it. Something important to note about the all-important ending of bulk fermentation is it's not like a specific point that you have to nail it or your bread's going to be a total wash. There is a definite space and time where you're able to end bulk fermentation and still get a really great loaf of bread. So don't feel like you have to watch it and you can't look away or you're gonna miss it. The key things to look for: bubbles on the side, big bubbles on the top, a domed surface. If it goes slack, it's really sticky. Those are key indications that it's gone too far. The yeast has eaten up all the food and it's starting to lose its strength. So ending it at the right time is key, but also if it overproofs, don't toss it, bake it anyway, and you never know what you end up with. So you might end up with a great loaf of bread anyway. I'm going to scatter my pastry board with some all-purpose flour. You can also do this on your countertop. I just don't have a food-safe countertop, so I'm going to shape it on this board. This is when you're going to want to have your dough scraper handy. And now we're going to dump. Like I said before, this is a 2-loaf recipe. I'm going to start by just taking my dough and dividing it down the middle. Now I have limited space to work with on my pastry board, so I can't do a full lamination that I would really like to do, but I do start by just stretching out my dough. And I'm going to fold it in on itself. So this side I'm going to bring into the middle. Take the other side, stretch it out, fold that into the middle as well, kind of wrapping it like a present. Bring all sides in on itself. You do want to be careful not to overwork the dough at this stage because you will pop all those beautiful bubbles we've spent hours creating. So this is the first shape. This is the loose pre-shape stage. So we're going to do the same thing with the other dough. So we'll pull it apart. If you were going to add any inclusions like cheeses or olives, anything like that, spices, this would be a great time to do it. Pull over, pull over. You can pop any bubbles like this, big bubbles, pop those, that's fine, because then you're gonna end up with huge empty pockets in your bread if you don't pop those. I think I forgot to shape that one. Okay. So it's not an exact science, but we've given them some loose structure. And then I'm going to cover these with a tea towel, and these will bench rest for 15 minutes. All right, 15 minutes have gone by. It's time to shape our loaves. I have my rice flour, and I use this little tea strainer just to dust the inside of my bannetons. You right there, love? Get those all prepared for the bread. Okay, and we'll set those off to the side. It was a lot warmer in my house today because I was baking, so my dough proved a lot faster than it normally does. So that is my basic shaping technique for the batard. So that's the oval shape. And then that gets put upside down into the loaf pan. And then we're gonna let this rest for a couple minutes, and then we're going to stitch it closed. So I'll pop that off to the side for a second. Okay, so I'm going to flip it over. And this is my basic technique for shaping the batard. Similar to the pre-shape, fold it over. Pop any big bubbles that you come across. Fold it over again. And give it a roll. Sometimes if it's feeling a little bit loose, I'll roll it again the other way, but this feels pretty good. Then we're gonna flip it upside down and get it into our banneton. And we'll give these just a couple minutes for the gluten to relax a little bit, and then we'll stitch them closed. It's been a couple minutes, the gluten should have relaxed a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and stitch these closed. So we're just going to close that up right like this. Pull it in and seal it like that. And then we're going to work our way down. First I'm going to do the other side, same thing. I'm going to close it, take the little end like this and fold it in. And then I'm going to alternate. I'm going to pull here, pull here, pull here. And I'm just going to stitch it closed. And this will give it good surface tension, which will help with oven spring. Same thing. Pop these big bubbles. Okay, we'll close it. My 10-month-old's losing his mind over there. Pull, close, and then we will stitch this one in as well. There we go. Then we'll cover with banneton, basket liners, or you can use reusable covers like this, shower caps. You can put it in a tied bag, really just anything to keep it from drying out while it's in the fridge overnight. Then you can let these sit out for, I like to do at least 30 minutes, depending on how well proofed they are. These are like, they seem pretty good. I do want to see a little bit of a bump that it's pushing up against the liner here, which I am seeing, and it should continue to rise a little bit more after I get it into the fridge. But it is a cooler day today, so I'm just going to give it like maybe 20-30 minutes on the counter, let it get a little bit more of a rise, and then I'll put it in the fridge overnight. You could actually bake it right now. That overnight proof though, it really helps with developing sour flavor, and just further gives it that really rich fermented benefit that comes from sourdough. If you're sensitive to gluten, the overnight ferment is a big plus. All right, these are looking great. They're gonna go into the fridge. Great about after you get your sourdough in the fridge, it's very flexible whenever you need to bake it. You have really, I've gone up to like 4 days and still had really good success putting it in the fridge, baking it. Turns out great. Now it is the next day. I have some loaves I made or prepared yesterday that we're going to bake. So this will be day 3 when we score and bake. Set your oven to preheat at 475 with your empty Dutch ovens inside, and let them get really toasty for at least 30 minutes. Okay, so we've pulled these out of the fridge. They are very cold. Got our bread lom. There are a lot of really fun scoring patterns you can use. I will demonstrate one of the easy ones I did a lot and still do a lot now when I bake. At this point, you can dust with rice flour. I tend to get the best results with just regular flour. But if you're sensitive to gluten, if that's the reason you're doing sourdough, you can dust with rice flour at this point. You also don't have to do this. You can totally skip this step. This just helps the designs stand out a little bit more, and I think it gives it a really pretty effect. So with the bread lamb, this is the corner they will be going in to the bread. We're not going to be scoring too deeply. We're going to be at a 45-degree angle, and we'll go right down the middle. And we'll go through it once just to clean up the cut, make sure it's all even. Again, I'm going in an angle. And then we're going to do 2 leaf designs. I'm not really sure what the technical term is, but I do 1 slash up here, and these are going to be more ornamental slashes. They're not going to be as deep as this center slash here that we did. So they're light. And just make your way down, and same thing on the other side. And we're going to flip it around and do the same thing over here. Okay, that's one done. Other one. And just as a reminder, these don't need any additional rising time after you bring them out of the fridge. They are good to go into the oven right after you get them from the refrigerator. The oven does need to be preheated with the Dutch ovens inside. So it's going to be going directly from a cold fridge to a piping hot Dutch oven. This one I'm going to do my other favorite scoring pattern lately, and I'm going to do the center slash at the end for this one, so that these have a little bit more time to expand. There really is no wrong way to do this. You can really do whatever you would like. And there's tons of different ideas online that you can look at. Same thing, I'm going to go down right down the center, 45-degree angle. And then just even it out. Right, our Dutch ovens are nice and toasty. We've been preheating for about 45 minutes at 475. And the bread will go right inside. Once they're in the oven, I turn down my bake temp to 450 and set a timer for 30 minutes. And a little tip, the baking sheet in the pan or in the rack directly underneath is going to help those bottoms, keep them from burning. Make sure you leave out your bannetons to dry naturally, or they will mold if you put them away like this in your cabinet. So that's happened to me before. Don't make my mistake. 30 minutes have gone by. I'm going to take off the lids and put them back in uncovered. My oven, the sweet spot is around 14 minutes. You may need to adjust the time for your oven and your preference for how dark you like your bread. I know it's tempting to cut into it right away, but the best practice is to wait at least an hour. They're still releasing a lot of steam, and if you cut into it midway through this crucial stage when they're cooling down, you're going to end up with a really gummy loaf of bread. That is really it. I truly believe that anybody can make bread. Years ago, I was super intimidated. So if I can do it, absolutely anybody can do it. So I really hope this gives you the confidence to just go for it. And if you have any questions, let me know.